If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and we are taking a look at the lead masks case. A case from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, which has perplexed and confounded many over the years. This case has been requested on MINDSHOCK, and we will take a look at it in typical MINDSHOCK fashion with logic and reason at the forefront, attempting to decipher the very few details in the case and what they could mean, and what the outcome really was, and what was behind all of this, because there's everything from paranormal to conspiratorial factors involved in this case, which make it one of the most mysterious cases of all time. As usual, if you want to help support the MINDSHOCK podcast, help spread logic and reason in a world where it's quickly becoming extinct, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. If you're still not getting notifications, just comment a whole bunch on a whole bunch of different podcasts, because that's how the YouTube algorithm works. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals of any kind, leave them in the comments section. All right, so let's jump right in here. Let's do the quick wiki breakdown before we go into the deep dive. The lead masks case, or the mystery of the lead masks, involves a series of events which led to the death of two Brazilian electronic technicians, Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana, who had last been seen by their families on August 17th, 1966. Their bodies were discovered on August 20th, 1966, and the cause of their deaths has never been determined. Events. On the afternoon of August 20th, 1966, a young boy was flying a kite on the Morro do Vintém hill in Niterói, Rio de Janeiro, when he came upon the bodies of two deceased males and reported them to the authorities. The Morro do Vintém had difficult terrain, and the police were unable to reach the bodies until the next day. When a small team of police and firefighters arrived, they encountered an odd scene. The bodies rested next to each other, partly covered by grass. Each body wore a formal suit, a lead eye mask, and a waterproof coat. There were no signs of major trauma or any evidence of a struggle. Next to the corpses, police found an empty water bottle and a packet containing two wet towels. A small notebook was also identified, on which were written the cryptic instructions: 1630 estar no local determinado, 1830 ingerir capsulas, apos efieto proteger, Mateus aguardar sinal mascara. The translation here: 1630, be at the specified location. 1830, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals, await signal mask. Okay. The two men were identified as Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana, two electronic technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, a town several kilometers to the northeast of Rio de Janeiro. Following an investigation, police reconstructed a plausible narrative of the men's last days. On August 17th, Cruz and Viana left Campos de Goitacazes with the stated intent that they needed to purchase some materials for work. The two men then boarded a bus to Niterói and arrived at 2:30 p.m. Evidence shows that the waterproof coats were purchased at a shop there and one bottle of water from a local bar. Upon being interviewed, the waitress from the bar described Miguel as very nervous and noticed he frequently checked his watch. That is the last time they were known to have been seen alive. It is presumed they went directly from the bar to the spot at which they were discovered. No obvious injuries were discovered at the scene, nor later in the autopsy, which took place several weeks later. As such, a search for toxic substances did not occur. The coroner's office was very busy at the time, and when the autopsy was finally conducted, the internal organs of the two victims were too badly decomposed for reliable testing. Now, was that convenient, or Theories. There are multiple theories that have been proposed to explain the case, ranging from foul play to UFOs. One theory revolves around the testimony of a friend of the two men who claimed that they were members of a group of scientific spiritualists. The men were apparently attempting to contact extraterrestrials or spirits using psychedelic drugs. Believing that such an encounter would be accompanied by blinding light, the men cut metal masks to shield their eyes and may have died of drug overdoses. This account is corroborated by the esoteric diary entry found at the scene and by the mask-making materials and literature concerning spirits found at the men's homes. Okay, so this is clearly a mind-shocking case. Now, this would explain why they're going to higher ground, so to speak, through rough terrain. I mean, apparently that would be able to contact the UFOs better. So on allthat'sinteresting.com, it is claimed that Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana were Brazilian UFO hunters specifically, not just spiritualists, but they were actually UFO hunters. So there's a few more details here. So Manuel was 32, Miguel was 34, so not that young. They were both married electronics repairmen who hailed from Campos do Goitacazes, about 175 miles away from Niterói. I mean, that's not that close, 175 miles. With their identities in hand, the police attempted to retrace their fatal steps. They found that Pereira de Cruz and Viana had told their families on the morning of August 17th that they needed to go to Sao Paulo to buy equipment and a car. Instead, the two men boarded a bus for Niterói. After arriving in Niterói around 2 p.m., the men made several stops. They bought identical raincoats at a local store and a bottle of mineral water at a bar. Significantly, they kept their receipt, suggesting that they meant to return the empty bottle later for the refund. What the heck? But witnesses who remembered them could tell that something was off. The bartender who'd sold Viana and Pereira da Cruz the water bottle recalled that Viana seemed nervous. She told police that he kept checking his watch. From there, the lead masks case went cold. Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana were last seen heading into the hills around 3:15 p.m. 3 days later, they were found dead. Paranormal theories around the lead masks case. To date, no one is exactly sure what happened in the hills of Rio de Janeiro that strange August. Even Pereira de Cruz and Viana's bodies offered few clues as they decomposed too much for an accurate toxicology report. But theories have emerged over the years. As police discovered at the time, Pereira de Cruz and Viana were more than simply electronics repairmen. According to Pereira de Cruz's wife, both men had dabbled in scientific spiritism, and both were interested in contacting alien spirits. In fact, they'd tried multiple times with their friend, Alcio Gomez. At one point, an electronic device the men had built together blew up in Pereira da Cruz's backyard. The three had apparently tried the device again on a beach and claimed to have witnessed an explosion in the sky. Police, however, followed more terrestrial leads. They briefly eyed Gomez as a suspect, since Pereira da Cruz's wife said that he'd fought with her husband. Gomez had also told them contradictory stories. Another man, Hamilton Bezzani, even told police he'd helped rob and kill Pereira da Cruz and Viana after meeting them at a spiritualism center and luring them to Niterói. He claims an accomplice told him, quote, "We have killed them both. We forced them at revolver point to take the poison," end quote. However, police were unable to find anything to back up his story. In the end, it's not enough to know why the two men went into the hills. This mystery continues to fascinate and frustrate because nobody knows what happened once they got up there. Da Cruz and Viana climbed Vintem Hill with a mission in mind. They slipped a lead mask over their eyes. Then their world went dark, and the mystery of the lead masks case began. Okay, well, so a few issues here. So we have a guy who allegedly confessed that he and another man robbed and killed them. Now, a few other issues here. So when did they rob and kill them? After they were already there and already took the psychedelics or whatever they took? Because he said that they forced them to take the poison at revolver point and then just left them there. So they were, in fact, robbed. They didn't find money on them or anything like that. I mean, there's so few details here. Also, is it possible other people actually put the lead masks on them? How do they know that they were the ones who slipped on the masks? A few more details here from Ranker.com, of all places. The men were allegedly linked to a secret society that studied scientific spiritism. During the investigation into Viana and Pereira da Cruz's unusual deaths, Cruz's wife told police that both men were scientific spiritualists. The spiritism movement was started by Allan Kardec in the 1800s. Pereira da Cruz owned several books by Kardec in which he wrote notes and highlighted passages. His wife also told authorities that Gomez, who had given them a ride to the bus stop, was also a practicing spiritist. The story only got stranger from there as evidence of clandestine science experiments and alien encounters reached the forefront of the investigation. I would like to know, did they simply stop the investigation there, or did other people stop them from looking further into the investigation? Because they're looking into this. Did they interview everybody associated with these spiritism people? And Gomez, allegedly, he's the one that gave them the ride? Did he really know where they were going? Like, his story changed, but what was his alibi? Did other people see Gomez locally so he couldn't have traveled 175 miles? So then it wasn't Gomez, if that can be corroborated. But continuing on here with Ranker, the two men may have been trying to contact extraterrestrial from Mars specifically. So not from Uranus, but from Mars. Police interviews, Pereira da Cruz's wife and Gomez all revealed that the men had attempted to contact alien spirits multiple times. Gomez told authorities the three men attempted to contact spirits on Mars using an electronic device they had built. When the men attempted to use the device in da Cruz's backyard, it exploded. Then they attempted another experiment at the Atofana beach on June 13, 1966. The men reported seeing an orange-covered oval floating in the sky that emitted bright rays of light before exploding. Multiple witnesses saw the flying saucer hovering over the ocean, and the explosion was felt several miles away. The Navy even investigated the blast. Okay, so they didn't make this up. Many speculate that the events of June 13 directly led to the events of August 17. And some even claim that Viana and Pereira da Cruz's deaths were some sort of revenge for the flying saucer explosion. Okay. Oh, man. So we are firmly in mind shock territory here. So apparently there was even a Navy investigation into the blast. Now, why would this device result in an exploding UFO or some kind of exploding light? So it was an orange-colored oval. So we don't know what that is, that floating in the sky. Was that, so that may or may not have been a physical object. So there was some kind of energy explosion. I mean, do we know if this is a physical object or not? The men had 3 pages of notes with them that included math equations and dosage instructions. A notebook found near the two men's bodies contained a series of mathematical equations, as well as some strange notes about dosages and meeting places. While the equations weren't too out of the ordinary considering Viana and Pereira da Cruz's profession, the notes were a red flag for investigators. The notes regarding dosages read Sunday, 1 capsule after lunch, Wednesday, 1 capsule at bedtime. The second page of notes included the following: be at the place arranged at 16:30, take capsules at 18:30. After feeling effects, protect half the face with lead masks. Await the agreed signal. The notes read almost as if somebody was verbally dictating to the men, but police had no idea what the notes meant. So was there some kind of medium channeling or things of that nature? Elcio Gomez gave authorities conflicting accounts about his relationship to the man. Police had initially ruled out Gomez as a suspect since he was about 200 miles away from where the deaths occurred, but they brought him in for further questioning August 27. At that time, Gomez confirmed all 3 were part of a secret occult group. Gomez went as far as to say most electronic technicians in Brazil were scientific spiritists, and that the men had indeed been trying to contact spirits on Mars using electronic equipment and telepathy. He was never directly linked to the deaths of Viana and Pereira da Cruz, but the latter's widow did tell authorities that Pereira da Cruz and Gomez had fought just prior to her husband's death. Okay. What else is actually kind of curious is this guy is claiming that all these electronic technicians in Brazil are a large portion are actually scientific spiritists. I mean, is this kind of like some kind of stonemason thing where a certain profession is involved with secret societies? I mean, that's kind of weird. That's definitely kind of weird. Another interesting claim here from the lineup.com. Local newspapers ran stories a few days after the bodies were found in which a resident claimed to see a round orange UFO hovering over the hill on the same night that the men had been there. So someone is claiming that also a round orange UFO. I mean, this matches the description of the other UFO in June in this other beach. So this is kind of weird. So are they actually communicating with some kind of interdimensional entities or actual extraterrestrials from Mars? Because if these UFOs are matching. And at the time of this account, was it known that about the other round orange UFO in June? Because if it wasn't known, then that's very curious. If it was known, then you could theoretically say that this local resident made that up. But if it wasn't known, I mean, round orange UFO? I mean, I don't know. UFOs can be any color. I mean, some people say green, white, yellow, red, whatever. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I would say orange is the number one. So if it wasn't known, I mean, that's definitely mind-shocking. Police uncovered a similar case involving a lead mask. The deaths of Viana and Pereira da Cruz were strange enough, but the case became even more perplexing when police discovered it was not an isolated incident. A TV technician named Hermes was found dead on a hilltop in another Brazilian town in 1962. As in the case of Viana and Pereira da Cruz, a lead mask rested beside Hermes' body. Further research and speculation pointed to the consumption of certain drugs that would allow for these men to pick up on radio and television signals through telepathy. As strange as this theory sounds, it would account for the dosage instructions in Viana and Pereira da Cruz's notebooks. The 1962 case also gives credence to Gomez's testimony that many electronics technicians in Brazil practice scientific spiritism. Okay, so first of all, how popular is scientific spiritism in general in the 60s in Brazil? And why does it seem to be so popular among this very specific profession? I mean, that is definitely strange. So this was in 62. So roughly 4 years prior. So how long was this popularity of scientific spiritism? And they're doing this with hallucinogenic drugs and all this from how many years is this going on? And if that's the case, why weren't there even more cases, or were they and they were simply not reported or discovered if they were more remote locations? The case remains unsolved, although one man gave a questionable confession. So in 1969, a prisoner, so it wasn't just a random guy, a prisoner named Hamilton Bazzani came forward and told authorities he was involved in the deaths of Viana and da Cruz. According to Bazzani, he was approached by 3 other criminals to help rob and murder the 2 men. So not one, like the other source said. Bazzani then claimed he went to a spiritualist center where he met Viana and Pereira da Cruz, and the group conducted a seance. The group then took a jeep driven by Bazzani to the foot of Vintam Hill, and Vianney and Pereira da Cruz climbed the hill with other members of Bazzani's group while he stayed at the jeep. Bazzani stated the group returned about a half an hour later with a briefcase full of money they had stolen from the men. One of the criminals reportedly told Bazzani, quote, "We have killed them both. We forced them at revolver point to take the poison," end quote. Authorities investigated Bazzani's claims but were unable to confirm details. So what does that mean? Does that mean the authorities actually did go to the spiritualist center and they met with these other people? Or is the spiritism center, is it associated with, perhaps high profile political individuals or people that just dissuaded local authorities from continuing to pursue the case, regardless of whether there was involvement or not? I mean, that's my thought thus far, if they did a thorough investigation. Lot of curiosities here. I mean, a lot of curiosities. So let's look at the main article here where the bulk of information comes from. You can find this on ignaciodelranaud.com/ufologia Bowen, 2 deaths, 1966, Brazil, FSR 67V13N2.pdf. The mystery of the Morro do Vintam. How did the men with the lead masks die? By Charles Bowen. It took the report of a landing or near landing of a UFO both to enliven and to complicate the scene when police inquiries into the seemingly senseless death of two young electronics enthusiasts on a hilltop near Rio de Janeiro on August 17, 1966, had led to one dead end after another. On the face of it, the UFO report seemed to be a fairly good one. So good that the police wrapped a cloak of security around certain aspects of it. And from then on, the focal point of the investigation switched to a beach at Atafana in the state of Espirito Santo. There, on June 13, 1966, a violent explosion had occurred, which rocked buildings as far as 15 kilometers away. Okay, hold on a second. So what are the chances statistically that coincidentally these scientific spiritists are trying to contact people on Mars and UFOs and aliens? Coincidentally, there's a massive explosion exactly while they're doing this? I mean, that's kind of coincidental. I mean, I don't know. What do coincidence theorists make of that? There was talk of a mysterious experiment on the beach, and shortly after that in a garden in Campos where some unusual device was tested. Whatever the experiment at Atafana, there was certainly a vast explosion and a ball of fire was seen by many. Indeed, local fishermen went so far as to say in their uncomplicated way that a flying saucer was seen to fall into the sea after the Big Bang. Among those present, both in the garden and on the beach, were Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, the men who later were to die with strange masks of lead beside them on the Morro do Vintem Hill at Niterói. The clamps go on. The reported investigations were interesting but a trifle confusing. From the mass of newspaper cuttings which poured into our office, it seemed that the Brazilian press and public were reeling from a surfeit of speculation. Whenever a new line was tried, new revelations came tumbling out. Then, as suddenly as it all begun, it ended. Unlike its apparent beginnings in the garden at Campos and on the beach in Atafana, it ended not with a bang but a whimper. Questions to our correspondents only elicited replies that the case had been killed and that the security clamps were on. Why? Because it really was a genuine UFO case? Question mark? That we may never know, but here, for the record, are the main facts of this bizarre story. And if it really was a real UFO case with either interdimensional entities or actual extraterrestrial from Mars or some other types of trickster beings a la John Keel, like ultra-terrestrials, whomever, and this was some kind of genuine account that everybody, authorities had to put the kibosh on it, never to be fully investigated if it were real. Death visits a hilltop. Flying Saucer Review carried a brief report of the case in the World Roundup, features of the November-December issue of 1966. Miguel Viana, 34, and Manuel da Cruz, 32, both married and with young families, were highly regarded in the city of Campos, where they lived. They had set out by bus for Niterói at 9 a.m. on Wednesday, August 17th, having left word that they were off to Sao Paulo to buy a car and electronic equipment. They took with them a sum of money estimated at around 3 million cruzeiros. And footnote here, so the great inflation, so roughly 6,165 was equal to 1 sterling. The men therefore had the equivalent of about 485 pounds with them. Their bus reached Niterói at about 2 p.m., and as it was raining, they purchased identical raincoats for 9,400 cruzeiros. Their next visit was to a bar where they bought a bottle of mineral water. They retained the receipt so that they could refund on the empty bottle. Okay. Then at about 3:15 p.m., they set off on foot up the Morro do Vintem. So if there were witnesses who saw them set out on foot, then that disproves the account of the guy who's saying that they went up with the Jeep with a bunch of other guys, but who knows? Unless that account is false of them going alone. If one of the guilty parties is the witness who said, oh yeah, we saw them walking alone, then that, that could theoretically explain that. At about 5 p.m., a boy saw them sitting at a point high up on the hill and, puzzled by what he had seen, returned to the spot the next day. Well, that's a curious detail. He saw the men laying on the ground and, thinking they were asleep, he left the place. That was on the Thursday. On Saturday, August 20th, the same boy was out hunting birds on the hill when he was nauseated by a strong odor. He ran and told friends, who in turn told the police. Okay, so apparently this boy saw them not once, not twice, but thrice, 3 separate times. Huh. Okay. He ran and told his friends, who in turn told the police. Huh, okay. So Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. Okay. The bodies of Miguel and Manuel were discovered, each neatly dressed in suits and new raincoats, and each with a strange leaden mask on the ground beside the head. Also discovered were notes with simple electrical formulae and other information as follows. Sunday, 1 capsule after lunch. Wednesday, 1 capsule at bedtime. And be at the place arranged at 16:30. Take capsules at 18:30. After feeling the effects, protect half the face with lead mask. Await the agreed signal. Some days later, it was discovered that the handwriting of the note was not that of either of the dead men. Interesting other point here. Puzzle. According to the Sao Paulo newspaper Ultima Hora of August 24th, Miguel was found to have 157,000 cruzeiros in a plastic bag in his clothing, while Manuel had only 4,000 in his pockets. Okay, so they weren't robbed? Or they had... Okay, so they were... Well, if they had 3 million and that's what's remaining. Okay. Naturally enough, the first theory was that the men had been attacked and robbed. A large number of cruzeiros had disappeared, and there were no signs of any electrical equipment they might have purchased. Indeed, reconstruction of their movements indicated that they could not have made any such purchase. Autopsies revealed that there were no signs of violence of any kind on the bodies, which, however, had started to decompose by the time they were found, or of burning, and that no poisons were discovered in their internal organs. Although, and of course, how many different tests were done on different organs? And how advanced were these tests in the 60s in Brazil? It was stated that there was no known cause for the cardiac failures. Together with the theory of robbery, there were suggestions that possibly Miguel and Manuel had been engaged in a smuggling operation for currency regulations making foreign electronic equipment difficult to come by in Brazil. There was also a hint that they might have engaged in espionage, but when it was announced that they had not suffered any physical violence, theories about the cause of their simultaneous deaths began to move way out. Hold on a second, though. If they really were involved in some kind of espionage, was the whole spiritist thing a cover for them traveling around and doing all these things? And if they were involved in espionage, that would also be a good reason to put the kibosh on any kind of real investigation. Now, what to make of these UFO connections, I don't know. Is it also... what would be kind of crazy? This is mind shock. We go down every rabbit hole. If they were involved in espionage and their cover was to infiltrate these spiritists, what if the spiritists really are communicating with some kind of interdimensional ultra-terrestrials or actual extraterrestrials from Mars, any of these beings, and they thought it was all fake? It turns out that that's true. So now this goes into higher levels of government or whatever. And so they really were doing some kind of an espionage. Maybe they were some kind of insiders for this kind of money smuggling in their field. Because if electronics equipment was hard to come by and there was a lot of smuggling, were they contracted? They said they were well respected, so perhaps they were recruited, and then they're doing this. Maybe the spiritists were also involved in some kind of smuggling, and they were using that as a cover, but then now it turns out that these beings that they're pretending to contact, that's all the cover. What if they're they don't believe in it, but what if these beings actually did respond? And this blew the whole case open. Is that what happened here? Again, I don't want to fall for any kind of appeal to incredulity, logic fallacies, or false dichotomies. All of these things can be at play. Skipping the more obvious idea that they could have overdosed themselves with some alkaloid, the capsules, the authorities and the newspapers played up the hypothesis that the victims had been killed while conducting, with no great skill, an unusual electronic experiment. Another commenter suggested a little sinisterly that they had died at the same time, at the time of the expected signal. A great deal of head-scratching was rudely interrupted by the next development, the UFO. The Jornal do Brasil and other newspapers of August 25th startled everyone with the story of Senhora Gracinda Barbosa Coutinho de Sousa, a society lady, social distinctions are very marked in Brazil, who had stated that she had seen an unusual object flying over the Morro do Vintém on the evening of August 17th. Okay, so is this some kind of high society woman who is just greatly respected? I mean, I guess they're appealing to some kind of credibility here that wouldn't necessarily be given to just a random person on the street. In the Jornal do Brasil, Senhora de Sousa was described as a sensible, well-balanced lady, entirely reliable, and very highly regarded in Fonseca, where she lives. Her story was that she was driving along with 3 of her children when they saw an oval-shaped object of an orange color with a band of fire around its edges. The object was sending out rays in all directions and was hanging over the top of the hill. She stopped the car and with her children watched the object as it rose and fell vertically for some 3 or 4 minutes. Whoa, that's a long time. When she returned home, Senhora de Sousa told her husband about the sighting, and he straightaway drove down to the observational point but saw nothing. A few days later, when the story broke about the discovery of the bodies on the hill, Senhora de Sousa took steps to keep the news of the tragedy from his wife, and then went to inform the police. The Jornal de Brasil stated that certain other details not quoted in the report were given to the police by Senhora de Sousa when she was interviewed. These, it was added, were being kept secret by order of the chief of police. The news that someone so prominent as Senhora de Sousa had taken the plunge prompted several other people to telephone the police with confirmation of her sighting. Their reason for not coming forward earlier, it was stated, was that they thought the object was a flying saucer and they preferred to keep quiet about that. This is very interesting. So once a prominent person of the society of the area came forward with the sighting, now other people weren't afraid to corroborate it because they didn't think they'd be viewed at as crazy if these high-profile people are reporting it. Very, very interesting. Another lead mask death. The mystery was heightened by the revelation that in 1962, another man, a TV technician named Hermes, I mean, that's a strange name. This guy's name is Hermes. I mean, does this open the door to possible psyops? Although, I mean, how prominent were psyops in the 60s? I mean, I don't know. Hermes is considered the herald of the gods. Heralds were originally messengers sent by monarchs or noblemen to convey messages or proclamations. So just straight from the wiki, Hermes is considered the protector of human heralds, travelers, thieves, merchants, and orators. He is able to move quickly and freely between the worlds and the worlds of the mortal and the divine, aided by his winged sandals. Hermes plays the role of psychopomp or soul guide, a conductor of souls into the afterlife. So this messenger and traveler between worlds. And how popular of a name is Hermes in Brazil? I mean, I've actually never heard of a Hermes. I've never known someone named Hermes. I've definitely never heard of anybody from Brazil named Hermes. So he had been found dead on the top of Morro de Cruzeiro near Neves. His corpse also had a lead mask lying beside it. Speculation continued the outward bound trend when the Folha de São Paulo of August 31st published an article in which a professor of yoga suggested that the men may have been trying to carry out a telepathic experiment with high-frequency thought waves. He explained that in experiments of this kind, alkaloids such as LSD-25 or mescaline are taken to step up mental alertness and the frequency of the brain, whatever that can mean. Meanwhile, on August 27th, a third man, a suspect, had moved into the limelight. The third man, Elcio Gomez, a friend of Miguel Viana and Manuel de Cruz, was arrested for making contradictory statements. In the Jornal do Brasil of August 27th, it was reported that Donna Nelly Pereira de Cruz, Manuel's widow, had stated that she had been present when there was a quarrel between her husband and Elcio Gomez, described as an assistant of the dead men. An assistant? So he worked with them as an assistant? Once Gomez was under examination, there were many more statements. We learned that Miguel and Manuel, like Gomez, were scientific spiritualists, and that in common with many other Brazilians, they regularly attended seances, that they were members of a secret society with unknown aims, but apparently devoted to spiritism. Another revelation was that almost all electronic specialists and enthusiasts in the district are spiritualists as well. Okay, so only in that district? Furthermore, it was told how Miguel and Manuel were hopeful of entering into communication with beings on Mars, that they collaborated in many strange electronic experiments, that they and Gomez had engaged in an experiment in Manuel's garden. This was confirmed by Manuel's father when a device they had built had exploded violently. Above all, Gomez's story of the happenings on June 13th, 1966 was made public. The Atafana Beach explosion. It seems that with others, Gomez had gone down to Atafana Beach on June 13th at the invitation of Miguel and Manuel. They had just arrived when an intensely luminous object came down over the shore. 5 minutes later, when it began to rise, there was a blinding flash and an explosion which rocked the city of Campos and buildings far beyond. When inquiries were made, local fisherfolk testified that they had seen a flying saucer fall into the sea. At this stage, we begin to read in the reports that the Brazilian Naval and Air Force intelligence services were taking an interest in both the deaths and the explosions. In the very last report we have on the case, appearing in O Cruzeiro of September 16th, this was only a story for a few weeks until it was never talked about ever again in any of the newspapers. That's a little suspicious. There was a story that the Navy's monitoring service had intercepted a strange conversation over the air between three radio hams on the evening of June 12th. The station prefixes were CKJ22 and CK22, who were talking to CKJ21. Details of the conversation were not disclosed, but investigations had shown that no such prefixes existed in the register of amateur radio transmitting stations in Brazil. Curious and curiouser. Two last words on the case were recorded in the same article. One was that the remnants of the lead from which the masks were made had been found in Miguel's workshop at his home. Also, a book on scientific spiritualism was found with messages marked regarding masks, intense luminosity, and accompanying spirits. The other was that Miguel's sister had disclosed that her brother had told her a day or two before the Atafana incident that he would soon be carrying out an important mission, but that it was a secret he could not disclose to anybody. He repeated the words a few days before he and Manuel were found dead on the Morro do Vintém. From then onwards, there has not been another whisper of the case in the Brazilian press. So that's a curiosity. As soon as it's reported that there's some kind of interest by intelligence, by military intelligence in Brazil, all of a sudden the case is never spoken of ever again in the press. Comment: too many amateur Sherlock Holmeses have been trying to solve this case for me to wish to add my name to the list. And again, if you haven't checked out the MINDSHOCK audiobooks, we do have the full Sherlock Holmes catalog in audiobook, as well as many other audiobooks for logical listeners interested in literature. And of course, developing logic and reason, Sherlock Holmes, one of the OGs of logic and reason. Continuing on here, it does appear, however, that theories of normal causes for the abnormal deaths have mostly been ruled out. It has also been established that Gomez and other friends had been in Campos, 4 hours drive from Niterói, when Miguel and Manuel were climbing to their rendezvous with death. So apparently he did have an alibi. Again, I cannot comment on the strange experiments in which the pair took particular delight, apart from echoing a remark in O Cruzeiro to the effect that electronics and voodoo appear to be strange bedfellows. They sure do. I will restrict myself, therefore, to a few words on that part of the case which is of particular interest to us, the reports of UFOs. One possibility is that the men were killed by a close encounter with ball lightning and that this was the phenomenon observed by Senora de Sousa. However, Maxwell Cade has already quoted instances of some of the lethal effects of fireballs, and surely the burning effects inflicted by such an apparently close encounter with the phenomenon would have been obvious to a pathologist even after decomposition of the bodies had set in. Again, if the Atafona object was also ball lightning, then it would have been a startling coincidence for the two gentlemen in question to have had two such encounters in such a short time. That's a good point. A correspondent has suggested that the device experimented with in the garden at Campos may, either by accident or design, have shot down a saucer at Atafona, and that the tragedy on the Morro de Vintem was an act of revenge, that Miguel and Manuel were tricked into making their visit to the top of the hill. I suppose this last idea is no more way out than some of the other speculations which have been bandied about. After all, we have no idea of the nature of the forces that may have been invoked by the victims dabbling with spiritism. And we must not forget that we all have no real clues as to whence the flying saucers or their occupants come, or to what extent they may have infiltrated among us. That's kind of creepy. It's a creepy way to put it. Two things are certain. The first is that in Brazil, there is a tremendous interest in spiritualism, and a great amount of spiritualistic healing takes place, and that amazing operations for painless removal of diseased tissues and cancerous tumors are regularly performed by gifted mediums. It would appear that Brazil is a country where the paranormal is rapidly supplanting the normal. The second fact is that Brazil has far more than its fair share of UFO cases. It remains to be seen whether or not there is any connection between these two facts. For the time being, the clamps are on, but in Brazil, things often have a habit of leaking out after a while. Maybe one of these days we will learn a lot more about this absorbing case. So, yeah, very, very perplexing, and he does have a good point. I mean, Brazil is a UFO hotspot. I mean, there are so many famous UFO cases. There's even a case of an alleged extraterrestrial humanoid walking the streets of a Brazilian town, seen by many, and then actually going to the hospital. I will be covering that on MINDSHOCK, of course. I mean, that case has stuck with me since the 90s when it was first covered in a few different UFO documentaries. So, yeah, I mean, this is truly, truly a perplexing case. Now, the coincidences with the UFOs and the explosion. So if the explosion wasn't corroborated by the military, by the Navy, and full investigation, all these witnesses and the shaking of other buildings very far away. I mean, if it wasn't for that, we could probably write that off. But I mean, there seems to be so much evidence that there was some kind of an explosion. It's a tough one. It's tough. I mean, no matter how you slice it, it seems difficult. Because if they were tricked, okay. Actually, I have one theory. This is the best theory I can come up with that seems to tick all the boxes. If there's some kind of money smuggling going on, because electronic equipment is tough to come by, and they're using this spiritualist center as some kind of a front, if these two particular gentlemen infiltrate, since they were so well respected and trustworthy, allegedly, perhaps the authorities contacted them to infiltrate this group. What if their infiltration was noticed? So then the other spiritualists, they didn't want their operation of the money smuggling exposed, so they set these men up using the methodology of the spiritualist front. Now, the only part that doesn't add up, was the spiritualist front also not exactly a front, and they really were communicating with aliens on Mars or some kind of ultra-terrestrial interdimensional entities? Because why would they? That's the thing that doesn't make sense. I mean, if there were none of these UFO sightings, I mean, that could be open and shut. Boom. If there's no beach UFO explosion, there's no UFO sighting where they died on the mountaintop. If there aren't these two UFO sightings, then maybe it was just the spiritualists setting them up. And they have to go along because they've infiltrated the club. So they have to, keep up appearances and do what the members of the club tell them to continue their infiltration. And then authorities, it's almost like a CI situation or undercover situation. They don't want to cover up that they got these guys killed and they failed to protect them, et cetera, et cetera. So they just put the kibosh on the investigation. That's the best theory I can come up with. And they maybe even paid off this other prisoner just to get him to make up the story about this. And so perhaps this other guy who they got into a fight with, that could possibly be unrelated. He could have been just a genuine friend who they had a fight or falling out with over something, who was also a spiritualist. And therefore he can't give any more answers because he has already gave everything he knew. The only part that doesn't exactly make sense is, of course, the 2 UFOs. So does that mean the spiritualist center, like they actually were contacting UFOs? The other thing, this other major factor that I can't wrap my head around is, why would their electronic equipment, like they're trying to communicate with the aliens, how would that cause an explosion? Or was it some kind of a weird malfunction? Did they get the frequency wrong and somehow the frequency caused the malfunction? I mean, I don't know. There's just so many aspects to this case, uncorroborated, and of course, it was just basically shut down and never spoken of ever again. Now, regarding the other guy that died 4 years prior, so we don't have any information on whether or not there was a UFO sighting, because that was 4 years prior, and if there was no real, so this is 1962, so even if there was a UFO and no witnesses came forward, or maybe they did come forward but it wasn't reported anywhere, what does that mean? Another curiosity is that there's so few details about Hermes. I mean, his last name isn't even mentioned here in this particular article, but I actually was able to find it on a random blog, masksign.wordpress.com. Tagline here: a sympathetic approach to the craziest ideas on Earth. It's actually a pretty interesting blog here with a lot of occult elements. But on July 5th, 2016, Mask Sign posted this: sometimes fate has a weird sense of humor. The parents of Hermes Louise Feitosa, for example, surely had no idea that their son, whom they named after the messenger of the gods, would one day meet his end in a strange experiment, possibly aimed at communicating with beings on a higher plane of reality. This happened in 1962, 4 years before Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz would meet a similar fate on the Morro do Ventém. The details of Hermes' passing are even sketchier than the tenuous and mutually contradictory hodgepodge of a mess that is gathered mythology of the Caso das Mascaras de Chumbo. I can't lock down the date to anything more precise than the year. That's another curiosity. Even the location is up for grabs. A lot of sources claim that Hermes also died on the Morro do Ventém, although others say it happened on the Morro de Cruzeiro near Neves, which seems more likely. Despite the slender details, sources agree on one thing: Hermes had a lead mask, handmade, crafted to cover the eyes, and was found dead of no apparent cause, with no injuries and no toxicology. Feitosa is mentioned in the first of the articles FSR ran on the lead mask case in 1967. That's the one I just read. So, continuing the blog post here, man, yoga in Brazil in the 60s was weird. And just what the hell were all the TV technicians up to? The authorities were apparently just confused as I am. When Miguel and Manuel's bodies turned up on the Morro do Ventém, they reopened the case on Hermes. It had been settled with similarly unsatisfying conclusions. But they failed to find any connection between the two. It seems that climbing a hill, dropping acid, and trying to communicate telepathically with Martians was just so damn common among Brazil's electronics technicians that it didn't count as a correlating detail when the 3 different men all dropped dead doing it. Oh, man. Oh, man. In terms of Hermes' intent with his sojourn on his own deadly Morro, nobody really knows. The yoga professor's assertion that it was a telepathic experiment suggests that Hermes was trying to contact someone or something, much like Miguel and Manuel. There is another suggestion on the Portuguese Wikipedia that investigations had revealed that the victim had gone to that place with a specific intent to experiment alleged psychic abilities that would have allowed him to pick up radio and television signals without the use of electronic means, but only through the power of the mind. The claim is unsourced, so the question of who carried out these investigations and what their results were, if it even happened, remain up in the air. Uh-oh. For an accompanying UFO, the official UFO chronology maintained by NICAP, the National Investigators Committee on Aerial Phenomena, does mention a UFO encounter in Brazil on July 30th, 1962. The brief entry specifies, quote, car motor stopped, then oval UFO seen alongside road, end quote. So we don't know if it was orange or not. It is the same year, but without knowing exactly when Hermes met his end, we can't know if this sighting happened around the same time or not. NICAP's entry specifies the area as near Pojucara, which is in the extreme northeast of Brazil, quite distant from both Niterói and Neves. Okay, then. If we widen our discussion to somewhat more circumstantial... You know what else is weird, though? They reopened this case, and they couldn't provide the exact date that this guy died, or at least a month. It's kind of weird. If we widen our discussion to somewhat more circumstantial matters, we find that the lead masks case bears some similarities to a rather darker chapter in the history of ufology, namely the mass suicide of the Heaven's Gate cult. I mean, I don't think there's... Yeah, I'm not even going to go into this. I don't think there's a connection here. Unless they're getting people to commit suicide, but not en masse, like individually. That's kind of weird. I mean, my theory is this. If this other guy also, let's say... See, we don't know exactly what's going on with these electricians in Brazil, in this area of Brazil, or this spiritualist cult or club, whatever we want to call them. So if this other guy was also possibly working undercover and they found out about it, would they also take him out? Or was he not working undercover and he simply, found out either accidentally or otherwise found out about the money smuggling or whatever? Because if it's this difficult to get reasonably priced electronics in the early 60s in Brazil, and these spiritualist clubs are just fronts for smuggling, but maybe they're not just fronts. Maybe they're also communicating with Martians. Does that account for all the UFOs? Now, this article continues here on the masksignwordpress.com. Some more interesting points here. As we've seen, the lead masks case is one that is deeply weird and also confusing. The contradictory accounts and lack of straightforward rationale behind the whole thing makes it a giant open question. What you've read, as incoherent as it seemed, is about the best I can do. It'll have to suffice until we drop our own vehicles and learn the truth behind the mythology. As usual, we'll settle things off with the wet blanket review, detailing the more sane possibilities and the Venusian conclusion, my personal best attempt at a resolution most pleasing to those of us who don't care much for sanity. The wet blanket review, lead mask case. The details of this case that tends most toward a rational explanation is, of course, swallow capsules. We've got no idea what those capsules may have been, of course, but generally speaking, when weirdos swallow capsules, there's a certain potential for disaster. We've covered the results of the autopsies, yes, there were two, and the idea that nothing poisonous or otherwise deleterious was found in Miguel and Manuel's bodies. And sure, that makes for a better story, so much so, in fact, that pretty much every paranormal story involving somebody swallowing something and then dying will always rush to inform the reader that yes, there was an autopsy, and no, nothing was found. And of course, all autopsies are not necessarily performed infallibly or without corruption involved. That works out great in terms of storytelling, but unfortunately real life can be a little less cut and dry. An autopsy, to be conclusive, requires a few key elements. First, the body has to be relatively well preserved. We know that Miguel and Manuel laid dead on the morrow for at least 3 days before they were recovered, and they were in the morgue for another few days before the actual autopsy. Secondly, certain organs need to be preserved in especially good condition. If it's a poison absorbed in the liver and the liver is gone, the poison is gone too. In the case of Miguel and Manuel, there's some doubt as to whether the right organs were in the right state. As it turns out, in a rather bleak detail of the case, this whole event transpired during the outset of what was essentially a military junta in Brazil. So, for those that don't know what a junta is, it's a military or political group that rules a country after taking power by force. So there's some political turmoil going on throughout this whole thing, and that's something that hasn't really been mentioned here. That could be a major factor. Obviously, locals would know more, but So, in the associated turmoil, suspicious deaths were fairly common, and the coroner's office found itself overwhelmed. There's some doubt that the bodies were handled in a timely manner, and even a suggestion that certain of their organs were simply removed and disposed of before the initial autopsy because they were already too far gone to be of any value to the coroner. All of this makes poison or overdose a distinct possibility. There's also Hamilton Benzani's claim that the men were killed for the money they carried, although this seems a stretch. Benzani laid out an extremely complicated plot. I mean, it's not that complicated, requiring multiple collaborators and a frankly silly assassination scheme. The money, which they may not have even had, was about enough to buy a fairly expletive old car, so it wasn't really worth the hassle. A simple mugging would have been much less trouble. That said, foul play isn't exactly out of the question. The aforementioned junta was fast to crack down on dissidents, intellectuals, and freethinkers, and the UFO scientific spiritualist community was one of its targets. Although there's no indication that anybody was killed for believing in UFOs, the articles in the Flying Saucer Review are careful to indicate that ufology work in Brazil was tough and getting tougher, as the junta did its best to bring the fringes of its society in line with its more conservative vision for the country. The government at the time was certainly not above removing its opponents through secret killings and forced disappearances. Maybe the junta's catchy slogan, Brazil, love it or leave it, was applied with a somewhat excessive measure of literality in the sense of the two unfortunate technicians. So it's possible that our boys were conned into committing suicide, or that they were rubbed out by a government that couldn't properly digest their inherent wackiness, or maybe they were just being weirdo UFO hippies, not an uncommon pastime back then, either in Brazil or in North America for that matter, and they took a little too much of something a little too strong. Or, as I postulate, if they were infiltrating this group and now in the middle of this junta, if they are cracking down on spiritualism and UFOs and all that stuff, UFO believers, is it possible that this UFO group found out that they were infiltrators and dealt with them? I mean, this guy didn't lay out the possibility, but that's the McGuire theory thus far. I mean, that's the best I can do thus far with the little amount of information here. None of these options are quite as exciting as the more bizarre possibilities. However, even if we are to assume their deaths were entirely earthly and prosaic, we can admire the hell out of these brave men's dedication to their own looniness. I think that most of us, if we're experiencing tremendous socioeconomic upheaval in the wake of a military coup, would postpone our plans to get high as expletive and mind meld with an alien civilization. Not these guys. They had jobs to do, families to support. They were citizens of a troubled nation with an uncertain future, but they had their priorities, damn it. First and foremost, they're going to get wrecked, protect those medals, wait for the mask sign, because that was the real expletive. I mean, it is curious. Yeah, they had families, they were full-time professionals, and they're also involved in this UFO spiritualist group. Now, were they also only involved in the group because they were undercover conscripted law enforcement, so to speak, and then they were found out about it, and then this happened, and in the middle of it all were there actual real communications with extraterrestrial or interdimensional entities? The Venusian conclusion led Mask's case. Try this one on for size. Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, alien killers. These men were scientists, which goes a little way toward resolving the UFO hunter/spiritualist divide mentioned earlier. If we can suspend our disbelief and lend some credence to what they believed, the extraterrestrial phenomenon has both a psychic component and a physical component. Maybe they were simply following the scientific method, developing a hypothesis and then testing it against reality. Maybe the reason they straddled those two camps is that aliens really do manifest this way. Miguel and Manuel developed their technology along two lines. The first, a psychic component, called the aliens and brought their UFOs. The second, physical component, was some kind of explosive weapon capable of bringing those bastards down. Following along in their exploits, they certainly do seem to be progressing towards something. First in the garden, no UFO is present, but some kind of device was tested, which resulted in a massive explosion. Then, the event at Atafana Beach, they just show up just in time to set up their gadget, and lo and behold, a UFO shows up, followed by an explosion that sends it crashing into the sea. They'd contacted the aliens through their psychic mastery, and then brought them in for what was supposed to be a peaceful and mind-expanding first contact, during which there's a 100% probability the aliens would have insisted that we get rid of our nukes, and then blammo, go to hell, revolting monsters from beyond the stars. That trick only works once, of course. They tried again at the Morrow, but the aliens had caught on, and they paid the men back for the loss of their ship. I like this scenario for a few reasons. In the context of the very peace-oriented and enlightenment-oriented New Age UFO mythology, it's funny for me to think that these guys would do the soul-scouring emotional labor required to develop the magic psychic ability to communicate with aliens, but they did so not because their intentions were actually peaceful and welcoming, but rather because that was simply what worked. But what I think is really interesting is that humans, of course, really aren't tranquil, welcoming beings. We're violent and xenophobic, and that's a terrible truth, but it's part of being human nonetheless. We're also stupid and brash and impulsive, and we tend to do idiotic things without first considering the consequences. There's a way in which blowing up a UFO, landing on a mission of peace, is a charming, idiotic, and delightful human thing to do. It reeks of confidence and pride, satisfaction in one's own essence, willingness to defend human individuality. Though these damned aliens are trying to change us, they want us to be peaceful and serene, just like them. The fascists, well, expletive that, buddy. Let's blow these dictatorial sons of expletives to kingdom come. I follow a guy on Twitter who hunts Bigfoot, meaning he actually hunts him with a loaded firearm in order to one day hopefully kill him, because he thinks Bigfoot is a dangerous predator and he'd be saving human lives by putting him down. I have a soft spot for people like that, and I like to think Miguel and Manuel fall into that category. I think it goes without saying that I don't condone warfare or violence in the real world, but spending time in the world of the paranormal is kind of like living in a metaphorical life. There's a way in which a true story about people trying to contact an alien is really a much more general story about what we as a species, as a mind, would look like from the outside. We've never had a chance to look at ourselves from the outside. We can only speculate. That's why you hear people say, I think one thing aliens would find really strange about us is ... A view from the outside is an objective view. The others see us as we are without the justifications and excuses we perform in our own thinking about ourselves. Humans are, in an objective sense, needlessly violent. That's something an alien would just see. That seeing is what real contact is. When they contacted Miguel and Manuel, they saw something that exists in all of us. Well, I mean, there's a lot of issues with that, because if the aliens are extremely violent themselves as well, they wouldn't consider that actually like a trait even worth noticing, especially if there would be more violent. I mean, who knows? It would be dishonest for us to greet aliens with an expletive-eating grin and tell them all about how peaceful and placid and open-minded and happy we are. They'd see right through it. Maybe at first contact we should have the Secretary General of the UN give a short speech and then have some brash knucklehead walk up and sucker punch one of the aliens. At least it would be an honest representation of our real nature. Maybe the aliens would be okay with it, maybe they'd be pissed, but at least we'd all be starting off on the same page. Somebody in the UFO community has to be that guy, has to remind us that human foolishness and violence is one of the things that ETs will encounter, or else the whole thing is just a self-congratulatory pack of lies about how evolved we are. We need people like Miguel and Manuel to keep us honest and humble, to show us that the truth is out there, human evolution is out there, but sometimes we blow expletive up when we shouldn't, and we have to keep that in mind. When you meet a stranger, it's important to put your best foot forward, but if you really want to communicate with somebody, you've got to be yourself. Okay. I mean, wow. Wow. Interesting thoughts there. So, I was also able to find a Portuguese website here, the mfilesconfidential-wordpress.com. And I don't know if this is based on more local information or whatnot, but we're going to go further down the rabbit hole here in typical MindShock fashion. So this is the Google Translate. I don't know how accurate it is, but let's see what they have here. So, sci-fi lovers, fasten your seatbelts. This post is for you. First, we go to Niterói, Rio de Janeiro, and go back to August 20th, 1966, when a group of friends was in Morro do Vintem looking for a lost paper kite. Unfortunately for them, the only thing they found was a strong stench and the traumatic image of two dead men. So, right off the bat, we have some slight differences here. It's a group of friends looking for a lost kite instead of one kid. The bodies rested side by side, lying on their backs on the floor, on top of a kind of bed made with palm leaves. Although no object was found that could have been used to cut them. Well, that's kind of weird, isn't it? Their watches were kept in their pockets, which also contained some money and identification documents, so they weren't completely robbed, apparently. We also have a pair of black glasses with a ring on one of the temples, a handkerchief with the initials MAS, an empty water bottle, a piece of aluminum foil, cellophane soaked in a chemical, a paper bag with 2 wet towels, and a notepad. From this whole list, you can ignore the items that are not in bold since I couldn't find more information about them. Honestly, I don't think the police either. Of course, this is just the tip of the weirdness iceberg. The men were ready for their own funerals, dressed in smart full suits and waterproof coats. To go with the outfit, obviously a stunning accessory could not be missing to make a person stand out in the crowd. Our dead friends opted for the latest fashion in lead masks, cut in a shape similar to sunglasses minus the temples. Met Gala ready, no doubt. Some articles, blogs describe these masks as the type used to protect against radiation. No. In high radiation environments, the masks used cover the entire head, incorporating closed slits so that one can see. These homemade masks were the opposite, leaving the entire head unprotected, but blocking the view. Far from the best idea if the intention is to avoid radioactive poisoning. But let's take a look at the notepad, the instructions. One of the pages contains several sequences of numbers and letters, presumably belonging to reference codes for electronic tubes that the victims intended to purchase. There are those who say that these are encrypted codes, but in any case, far from being the center of attention when we have a whole set of cryptic instructions. I think we can all agree that the grammar is weird, even for Brazilian Portuguese. As written, the notes are ambiguous. From the first paragraph, we can deduce two scenarios. Either the men were going to meet someone, or they were waiting for something to happen. The second is more complicated. Apparently, we also have capsules involved in the story. Was one supposed to wait for the effect before or after ingesting them? As for the last sentence, protecting metals, could refer to watches that were kept in pockets, but what sign were they waiting for? We have 1001 questions, but the main one is, who gave you these instructions? The path to tragedy. The men were identified as Manuel Pereira da Cruz, 32, and Miguel Jose Viana, 34. Two electronics technicians married with young families, very respected in the city of Campos dos Goitacazes, where they lived. They were close friends, and together they planned to create their own business. According to an article in the magazine O Cruzeiro from 1968, the police reconstructed a plausible narrative of his last days. On August 17th, 3 days earlier, Cruz and Viana left Campos. They told their wives that they were going to Sao Paulo to buy electronic equipment and a car, taking with them 2,300,000 Cruzeiros, about 900 pounds at the time. According to witnesses, packed in a plastic bag wrapped in thick paper, that money was never found. But other money was found in their pockets. Okay. They took a bus to Niterói, contrary to what the families had been told, and arrived at 2:30 p.m. It was raining. They went to buy the waterproof coats they were wearing and the bottle of water. Receipts were in the body's pockets. When the police questioned the employee who served them at the bar, she said that Miguel seemed very nervous and worried about the time, constantly looking at the watch on his wrist. It is presumed that they went directly from the bar to Morro do Vitem. A civil guard, Rolino de Matos, declared that he believed he saw the victims getting out of a jeep at the foot of the hill, together with two other people. They were never identified. Okay, so this is curious because there was a witness here corroborating the story of that convict prisoner. That is curious. We'll get into them later. This was the last time the men were seen alive, and the results of the autopsies. In a case like this, it would be strange to have conclusive autopsies. The corpse's skin had a pink tinge and looked like possible burns, but decomposition had reached a point where such a conclusion was not safe. This is from Jacques Vallée's Confrontations 1990 book. And of course, Jacques Vallée also shared some interesting ultra-terrestrial type theories that John Keel also went into. The bodies showed no signs of trauma, evidence of struggle, or radioactive contamination. Several toxicological tests were carried out, but all were negative. Taking these facts into account, although not very reliable due to the advanced decomposition of bodies, the police deliberated several hypotheses. Could it have been a robbery? It is true that much of the money they had taken with them has not been found. But if they were stolen, why not take everything? Could it be the two smuggler friends? Spies? ? I can list countless scenarios that end in homicide or suicide, but none fit all of the strange details and circumstances. Although I believe the Maguire theory might. All lines of investigation ended at the same dead end. No sign of violence, no poison in the digestive tract, no clue as to the cause of death. This is what quote from investigator Salo Soares de Souza. It was the aliens. After the newspapers announced what happened with the usual enthusiasm and fuss, a witness appeared. Gracinda Barbosa Coutinho de Souza, a society lady who surprised everyone when she reported having seen a UFO hovering over Morro do Vintem the night the men were there. She described the object as orange oval with a line of fire on the edges, shooting rays in all directions as it hovered over the hill. Subsequent to this revelation, the police received calls from a large number of witnesses confirming this event, justifying the delay with fear of ridicule linked to UFOs. Of course, no one has a single piece of evidence to back up the reports. There are no two without three. The mystery intensified when investigators discovered a similar case that occurred in 1962. Hermes Luis Feitosa, TV technician, was found dead in Morro de Cruzeiro with all his belongings and without any evidence of a cause of death. The most important factor, the lead mask he had with him. Reportedly, Hermes intended to conduct an experiment where he would use psychic abilities to pick up radio signals without the use of electronic means. By all appearances, the local community of electronics technicians must all be involved in some kind of cult. All this fuss came to add a priest to the party. Oscar Quevedo, professor of parapsychology, gave a statement to the newspaper O Globo, informing that lead masks were used in deadly occult tests. As these experiments could fulminate their practitioners, the masks served to provide some protection. The person should be fasting in order to cause physical and mental imbalance and ingest a certain amount of a certain drug. This would allow you to enter a trance. Okay. I mean, wow. Professor of parapsychology. I mean, that guy's got to know something about these spiritualists in the area. Meanwhile, on August 27, 1966, another man came into the spotlight, the friend. Elcio Gomez, a friend of the victims, was arrested for making contradictory statements. In the Jornal do Brasil of August 27th, it was reported that Nel Pereira da Cruz, widow of Manuel, had declared to be present during a fight between her husband and Gomez. When questioned, she revealed a lot of interesting things. She told the police that Miguel and Manuel, like himself, were part of a local group of scientific spiritualists, that almost all electronic specialists in the district were also in this group, that the three were interested in trying to get in touch with Mars, having collaborated on some weird experiments. One was held at Praia de Atafana, close to where they lived. The three caused an explosion so big that the local population thought there had been an earthquake. And again, there's some, I don't know about this translation, but it's obviously disputed whether they caused it or whether they were simply there coincidentally at the same time. Local fishermen claimed to have seen a flying saucer fall into the sea. For a while, the subject was only talked about, but the Brazilian Navy itself investigated the accident. But these guys knew how to liven up any place. They are not limited to beaches. Just ask Manuel's father when he was alive, and they would have had the testimony of how a device exploded in his garden about 2 months before the deaths. To support these claims, when searching the men's homes, they found the tools needed to cut the lead masks, as well as a book that contained highlighted passages about the intense luminosity of the entities they hoped to reach. As the police found no evidence against Elcio, they ended up releasing him. 2 weeks after the deaths, the newspaper Folha de Sao Paulo published a statement from a yoga teacher. This claimed that the local spiritualist community used psychedelic drugs like LSD, and that Manuel and Miguel would have died due to an accidental overdose. This man may not be the best or most credible source, but the truth is that he presented a version of the story that fits better than most. And let's not forget that autopsies are not that reliable. In May 1969, the Brazilian justice filed the process due to lack of evidence. After all, what are we left with? After all this testament, the reality is that we only have deductions and more questions. Where did the money go? Did they spend it to get the instructions in the capsules? And what were those capsules? Who provided them? What effect were they supposed to have? Would they be poisonous? Why the palm tree beds? Why the wet towels? And the facts. Did they want to impress someone, which might include wanting to represent the human race well when encountering aliens? Definitely not the most comfortable outfit for walking up a hill. Did someone tell you that if you took a certain drug at a certain time in a certain place, you would get a ride on a UFO as you so desired? Was it all a spiritual experience gone so wrong? Did it involve more people? The conclusion everyone reached was that the only determination of the cause mortis could bring the definite solution. Okay, that's a quote from Jorge Audi, O Cruzeiro magazine, 1968. Don't even know what that means. Unfortunately, this was never identified. 14 years later, in 1980, new questions arose when the investigator and writer Jacques Vallée, who worked for NASA, came to Brazil exclusively to visit the site of the incident. Did he really work for NASA? So apparently Jacques Vallée is actually still alive. He's 83. And he So he actually co-developed the first computerized map of Mars for NASA in 1963. He later worked on the network information setup for the ARPANET, a precursor to the modern internet, as a staff engineer of SRI International Augmentation Research Center under Douglas Engelbart. Huh. Interesting. He's got a PhD in industrial engineering and computer science. So I don't know if he worked directly for NASA, but he worked on NASA projects. Okay. So apparently he came to Brazil exclusively to visit the site of the incident. Accompanied by his wife and a small group of interested parties, such as Detective Saulo Soares de Souza, Rio police investigator, Mario Diaz, police reporter, and the first adult to see the bodies, they ended up deliberating the theory that the two men would have an intellectual mentor who manipulated the situation. They wanted observed researcher Saulo Soares to make a third attempt to contact the entity in question. There must be someone at a higher level who stayed behind the scenes whom they trusted, not possibly the person who gave the orders written in the notes. This is Jacques Vallée's statement from the book Confrontations, 1990. The story of the first adult to see the bodies also differed somewhat from what was published in the newspapers. He insisted that the bodies had no scent and further mentioned that the corpses were not attacked by animals despite being already decomposing. If you think this is weird, get ready for the icing on the cake. Two things stood out when the group arrived at the Morro. The vegetation had not grown back in the place where the bodies were found, since the silhouettes of the bodies were demarcated as if someone had gone around them, and the land showed signs of having been calcined, which is only possible when the soil is exposed to high temperatures. One more question to answer, one less question to answer. At this point, what difference does it make? More than 50 years later, and no one really has any idea what the two men were doing that night in their lead masks. A mystery that confounds skeptics and believers alike to this day. The police investigation appears to have been bizarrely incompetent, perhaps as a result of the case being somewhat neglected. With scant police evidence, circumstances, and no access to documentation that may well not exist, we can't do much more than speculate. Case filed. Now, I mean, I still think that whoever that spiritualist club, I mean, there's obviously people there that know something. I mean, they know something. So there were actually two more follow-up articles in Flying Saucer Review. Another one also by Charles Bowen. This is the follow-up to the previous one. Let's go over this one. No easy solution to the Morro mystery. By September 66, it was virtually impossible to extract even one recognizable strand of sense, let alone a chain of evidence from the tangled skein of discoveries, revelations, theories, and accusations which enmeshed the investigation into the bizarre death of the two Brazilian electronics technicians. The bodies of Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Ferreira da Cruz were discovered on Saturday, August 20th, 1966, on the slopes of the Morro do Vintém, not far from Niterói, itself only a few kilometers from Rio de Janeiro. The decomposing bodies were neatly dressed in suits and brand new raincoats, and by the side of each head was a strange facial mask made of lead. According to the original accounts, the two Campos technicians were last seen alive in Niterói on August 17th, 1966, when they purchased their raincoats and a bottle of mineral water before setting off on foot up the Morro do Vintém. That evening, August 17th, a Senora Gracinda de Sousa was driving along the road near the hill when she saw an oval-shaped fiery object alternately hovering and then plunging and soaring vertically over one spot on the slope. She told her husband, and he later told the police after the news had broken about the discovery of the bodies. From the vast number of sensational revelations and speculations, it emerged that the unfortunate Miguel and Manuel were active members of a group of scientific spiritualists who dabbled in spiritism, explosives, and communications with Mars, and who, according to reports, had already been entangled explosively with a UFO at the Atafana beach near Campos, June 13th, 1966. I mean, is that what you would... I mean, people dabble in ufology. How many people dabble in Mars communication? I mean, you're just talking at a bar. Yeah, I mean, what do you do? Yeah, I dabble, a little bit of basketball, a little bit of Mars communication, a little bit of a couple other things. Then, with the inquiry becoming very interesting, in spite of all the confusion, further news of it was abruptly cut off, and the case slid into oblivion in mid-September 1966. Case reopens. 11 months later, there was a fitful spluttering of news of the continuing investigation. Not one thing emerged that could help untangle the mess. On August 19, 1967, a report was carried in the Rio newspaper Ultima Hora, which stated that the police were searching for a car, a registration number of which was known, in which the bodies of Miguel Viana and Manuel de Cruz had been taken from Campos to Niterói for dumping on the slopes of the Morro do Vintém. Okay, so this is a mind-shocking revelation. So in this Ultima Hora newspaper, they're saying that the bodies were dumped. So were there two witnesses that saw them walking up the mountain, one without a Jeep and one with a Jeep and additional parties? And so now, is there yet another individual who came forward, and the police had a registration number of a car allegedly dumping the bodies? A touch of confusion was added by an announcement that if the search went well, the bodies would be exhumed at Campos on August 25th, 1967. This, it seems, was necessary to determine whether the victims were murdered or poisoned by chemicals which they were using to make extraterrestrial communications, or whether they died in a suicide pact by taking a corrosive acid. It was reported in Ultima Hora of August 27th, 1967, that the exhumation had taken place and that certain organs had been removed for examination. Okay, we're further in mind shock land here. Delegate of Police Sergio Rodriguez went so far as to say, important pieces of evidence were disregarded at the start of the inquiry and are now being used by my team. Although I have not yet got the clues to clear up the case, I do believe that in a few days' time I'll be able to hand the guilty party over to the judicial authorities. Well, that's a bold claim. I have not yet got the clues, but I do believe in a few days' time I will have the guilty party. I mean, that's a bold claim. Civilian airline pilot Elcio Gomez had been arrested. He's an airline pilot? What? This was never specified. For making contradictory statements. So is he? So he's also some kind of an assistant electronics repairman and also a civilian airline pilot? Or did he become a civilian airline pilot afterwards? But he's also part of the scientific spiritualist community. So he was another scientific spiritualist, an associate of the dead technicians. Under questioning, he made all manner of revelations. One of these was that there was a clandestine radio station maintained by the two men at Glicerio in the Mackay district, according to Ultima Hora of August 31st, 1967. The mystery was deepened by the reported disappearance of the two detectives sent there to investigate. What? What is going on here? This was already one of the most mind-shocking cases ever before I found this follow-up article. But now this is going all time now. This is all time one of the most mind-shocking cases. So let me get this straight. Now, in a previous article, we did go over those unknown radio transmissions that were not used by military. Now, Elcio, a year later, or it was reported a year later. We don't know when he made this statement. So this report is a year later. So it is unknown at which point Elcio Gomez made these statements. Did he make them the previous year and they were only being revealed now in this newspaper, Ultima Hora? Or was he re-interviewed and he made these revelations now? But either way, so there's two men. So two detectives went to investigate this clandestine radio station. And they disappeared? What? Fortunately, this new mystery was of only temporary duration, for in Correio de Manha, I'm assuming that's a newspaper, Rio de Janeiro, of September 3rd, 1967, we read that the same detectives were busily theorizing to the reporters. So they didn't disappear? New investigations, it seemed, were expected among spiritualistic circles by police who had now established the precise movements of Miguel and Manuel between Niterói bus station and the foot of Morro do Vintém on August 21st, 1966. So they have new information? What is going on here? When I read this, I confess I almost gave up in despair, for we have voluminous accounts from the previous year which show that the bodies in an advanced state of decomposition were discovered August 20th, 1966. August 21st. So there's not even 100% corroboration which day they were found. I mean, this is a problem. And what did those two detectives that may or may not have disappeared, and if they did disappear, it was only briefly, what did they find out during their disappearance? Or were they re-educated somewhere? Like, what's going on here? Because if this clandestine radio station, if it has something to do with some kind of top secret government operation, if these guys were undercover in some way, or it's some kind of real UFO thing that has nothing to do with the government, like, who were they re-educated by? Were they re-educated by the Martians? And then they kept it all hush-hush? Or did they stumble upon some government operation involving UFOs or something else, and then they disappeared for a week or weeks or however, and they were briefed on what was going on and then released again? Because, I mean, the early reports that they completely disappeared and nobody could find them. Then all of a sudden they're back? Or are those even the same two guys? I mean, there's so many questions here. I'm surprised they haven't made, like, endless movies and TV shows about this case. I mean, it's insane. Back to square one. So there it rests. For all the resounding phrases and ominous hints of pending arrests, for all the discoveries, including the van said to have... So there's also a van in place. So it's not only the Jeep from the other side. Now there's also a van with a registration number. And there's a new theory that the van transported the already dead bodies. Murdered bodies to the foot of the Morro, and for all the pathological examinations of exhumed bodies about which nothing was said because nothing was found, ? We find ourselves well and truly back to square one, and to boot with some exasperating carelessness over the dates. In the end, the police had succeeded in adding just one 1967 ingredient to the 1966 mixture, and that was the speculation that Miguel and Manuel had met their murderer after their call at an electronic equipment store in Niterói, where they were in no hurry, and before their call for mineral water at a bar, where they displayed a marked degree of urgency. With a pious hope expressed in the Correo de Manja that the mystery would be solved in a week, the case once again disappeared in limbo. And did that investigator who said it would be solved in a week, did he get paid a visit from whatever clandestine operation re-educated the two missing detectives? And then none of this was ever to be spoken of again. Alarming suggestions and unpleasant undertones inherent in the 1966 discoveries had no doubt led to questions being asked when, after a year, nothing had been resolved about the deaths of the technicians. Was the case allowed to reappear briefly so that the police could project the idea of a murderer? After all, down-to-earth human mayhem is so much more reassuring than wild hints about spiritist dabblings with dark forces, or any suggestion that the men in the lead masks were done away with by a UFO, or even a great big glob of plasma. Wow. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, this is truly mind-shocking. There's one more follow-up, this time by a different author, Gordon Crichton, in the July-August 1971, volume 17th, number 4, Flying Saucer Review. Let's see what we got here. And I mean, this is truly one of the most mind-shocking cases of all time. It will be recalled that in two articles published in 1967 and 1968 respectively, Charles Bowen discussed the curious affair of Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, the two young Brazilian TV and radio technicians who died in decidedly mysterious circumstances on a hill in Niterói near Rio de Janeiro on or sometime soon after Wednesday, August 17th, 1966. Beside each body, when they were found 3 days later in a thicket on the hill, was a leaden half-mask without eye holes. Also found on the bodies were notes, some giving simple electronic formulae and others containing cryptic instructions in an unidentified handwriting, such as Sunday 1 capsule after lunch, Wednesday 1 capsule at bedtime, and be at the place arranged at 16:30, take the capsules at 18:30. After feeling the effects, protect half the face with lead masks. Await the agreed signal. So they were to wait for 2 hours before taking the capsules. So they were to go there, wait for 2 hours, then take the capsule. That's kind of weird, 2 whole hours. The case naturally gave rise to a welter of fantastic speculation in Brazil, and all sorts of theories were advanced, one of the most popular being that the two victims had made some kind of rendezvous with UFO entities and had been killed by them. This particular theory was moreover reinforced considerably when it became known that a prominent Rio de Janeiro lady, Senora Gracinda Barbosa Contino de Sousa, had told the police that she and 3 of her children had been traveling by car near the Morro do Ventamo on the evening of August 17th when they saw an oval-shaped object of an orangey color with a band of fire around its edges, hanging stationary above the hill and then emitting vivid beams of light. They had stopped and watched it for some 3 or 4 minutes, during which period it had made no lateral movement, but rose and fell in the air several times. And there were also much rumor about the other secret details which the lady had allegedly divulged to the police. Other witnesses also came forward and said they had seen the UFO. Other press made much of the fact that a little over 2 months previously, June 13th, Miguel and Manuel had been engaged in some mysterious experiments on the beach nearby at Atafona, in the course of which an intensely luminous object came down over the shore. An explosion and a blinding flash occurred a few moments later, and local fishermen in due course testified that they had seen a flying saucer fall into the sea at the time. Other sensational revelations and allegations suggested that the unfortunate pair had been active members of a group of scientific spiritualists who dabbled equally in voodoo and spiritisms, explosives, and communications with Mars. By mid-September 1966, the case had slipped into oblivion. Charles Bowen concluded his first article with these words, quote, "For the time being, the clamps are on, but in Brazil, things often have a habit of leaking out after a while. Maybe one of these days we will learn a lot more about this absorbing case," end quote. After the bodies, already partly putrefied, had been found on the hillside August 20th, 1966, the Brazilian newspaper stated that no signs of violence had been found on them and that the autopsies had been performed, which revealed no signs of poison in the internal organs. Likewise, no cause for the cardiac failure had been found. After a year had elapsed, the Brazilian press reverted to the affair and reported between August 19th and August 26th, 1967, that the bodies had been exhumed for certain organs to be examined again for poison. I mean, how much had technology advanced in just 1 year from 67 to 68 in Brazil? The papers also reported the arrest of an associate of the two dead men. This was a civilian airline pilot named Elcio Gomez, the third man, involved in the mystery experiment on the beach at Atafona. Gomez was now taken into custody, the paper said, for having made contradictory statements to the police. Under interrogation, it seemed that he had allegedly made all manner of revelations, one of these being that the two dead men had operated a clandestine radio station. Now, you know what else is curious, though? If he's an airline pilot, like, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Because they have a pilot here involved with them, with these alleged communications with entities traveling from Mars. All this was related briefly in Charles Bowen's second article, which concluded with the question, was the case allowed to reappear briefly so that the police could project the idea of a murderer? After all, down-to-earth human mayhem is so much more reassuring than wild hints about spiritist dabblings with dark forces, or any suggestion that the men in the lead mask were done away with by a UFO, or even by a great big glob of plasma. Another long silence seemed to have followed. One of the most frustrating and disappointing facts about the job of producing FSR is that we are so totally dependent on the reports which have to reach us from the source, and that means from all the far corners of the earth. If, as so often happens, we print no follow-up on a case, however exciting or interesting it may have been, common sense would surely indicate that this must be because we got no further reports. It is curious that so many readers who are perfectly well aware that FSR is a publication produced on an almost totally voluntary and unpaid basis, in their spare time by a tiny group of dedicated people, get so impatient and write to inquire why we have said no more about this or that case. A little reflection would surely show that operation on such a scale would call for vast funds and resources, and a global research organization such as FSR certainly does not possess. And indeed, such as only powerful corporations or governments could possess. More news filters through. In this particular case of the Morro do Ventém, I am happy, however, to be able to report that the ghosts of the unfortunate Miguel and Manuel still continue to walk after 1967, refusing to lie down as it was no doubt hoped they would. And a few further press items about them may have come our way. Thus, on June 28, 1968, under the headline, "After the Atomic Test," the newspaper O Globo from Rio de Janeiro was writing as follows, quote, "A blonde man now emerges in the mystery of the leaden masks just at the moment when science had given up. As unattainable, the last hope of securing a technical clarification of how precisely the radio workers Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz met their deaths. The unknown wanted man, whose appearance is that of a foreigner, was seen by a witness sitting at the wheel of a jeep and conversing with Miguel and Manuel on the road up the Morro do Ventém on the day before the bodies were found. Yesterday, the atomic scientists in Sao Paulo gave their verdict a negative one on the test they have been conducting on the hair from the corpses. And with that, the Rio police delegate in charge of homicide cases, Senor Roman Jose Vieira, has closed the inquiry and forwarded the dossier to the Ministry of Justice. The text of the report issued by the Atomic Energy Institute in Sao Paulo is as follows. As an exceptional measure, the Radiochemical Division has conducted an analysis by neutronic activation on some hair sent to them by the Medico Legal Institute of the state of Rio de Janeiro. 4 elements were sought in the hair, namely arsenic, mercury, barium, and thallium. The results are as follows. Arsenic, 0.000041%. Mercury, 0.0001%, barium 0.0001%, thallium 0.0001%. This result proves scientifically that the deaths of Miguel and Manuel were not due to the ingestions of these poisons, although of course unknown whether it was other poisons. Official explanation. 8 more months passed, and then in the first quarter of 1969, a few more press clippings on the case reached FSR from Brazil. The following paragraphs are a translation which I have made from one of the fullest of these reports, Correio do Povo from Porto Alegre, February 23rd, 1969. But I should add that for convenience, I have also incorporated into a number of minor features and clarifications which come from several other press reports of about the same date, but for which we have no precise indication of day or the name of the newspaper. Latin mask mystery solved after 3 years. Rio, February 22nd. The mystery of the 2 electronic technicians found dead 3 years ago on the Morro do Vintém with lead masks besides them, masks which subsequently came to be considered as having originated on another planet. What? Has now been cleared up with the confession of the underworld figure Hamilton Benzani. Hamilton Benzani, notorious criminal, smuggler, and car thief, already serving a sentence of over 50 years in Sao Paulo, had told a woman relative of his who lives in Rio that he had been connected with the murders, and when delegate João Antonio da Silva of the Rio de Janeiro police went to the Sao Paulo prison to interrogate him, he freely admitted it, as the woman relative had told the police he would do so if skillfully questioned. Hamilton Benzani's story is that, wanted by the Sao Paulo authorities, he was hiding in Rio, where he was approached by 3 other criminals known by the nicknames of Espanhol, Wilson Alamao, and Acacio, who asked him to do a job in Niterói, which would yield good dividends for the 4 of them. So off they went to Niterói, where they first engaged a taxi, and then at a certain spot, they changed to a private car, which took them to a spiritualist center. There they met the proprietor of the place, a woman named Helena. Inside the spiritualist center, Hamilton Benzani was next introduced to Miguel and Manuel, who were already there. Espanhol, Wilson Alamao, and Acacio indicated to him by gesture that these 2 people were to be the targets. During the seance which followed, the criminals learned that Miguel and Manuel were in Niterói en route from their homes at Campos to Sao Paulo, where they planned to buy electronic equipment and a new car, and they had plenty of cash on them. Pointing to a briefcase carried by one of the targets, Wilson Alamao sagely remarked to his companion, "See, the spirit of fortune has descended, but it will shortly incarnate in other bodies." Hamilton Benzani told the police that at the close of the seance, he was instructed to take the wheel of the car standing outside and drive the party, Espanhol, Wilson Alamao, and Acacio, Helena, and Miguel and Manuel to the foot of the Morro do Vintém. Wow, that's a lot of people. There, the others forced the 2 men to get out and go with them into the thickets on the hillside, where Hamilton Benzani stayed with the car, which was a stolen one. Half an hour later, the 3 men and the woman returned to the car looking nervous, holding the briefcase containing NCR $6,000. Wilson Alamao told Benzani, "We have killed them both. We forced them at revolver points to take the poison." The party then drove off to Guanabara, fixing a rendezvous together for the next day, which Hamilton Benzani, fearing a trick of some kind, did not keep. The police say they're on track of the group and will have no difficulty in apprehending them, as they are notorious criminals. One of the press reports said that the police already had the voodoo woman Helena. And there for the moment I fear we must leave the matter, as no further news about the case has reached me. It may well be that have been apprehended, have confessed, and the dossier is closed once and for all time. If so, I have not heard about it from any of the correspondents in Brazil. That is curious, though. If they actually did solve the case, would they not announce it for whatever reasons? Now, here's another. This is another theory I hadn't considered previously. So if they're not undercover agents, or maybe they are, but they were never discovered, and they're just in the spiritualist center, if they happen to be more loaded with cash than others, is it possible that other members in this spiritualist center simply knew they had cash and hired this notorious hitman to help kill them? But on the other hand, why leave this hardened criminal to just be the driver? I mean, couldn't one of them have driven? That's kind of weird. Or are they also super hardened criminals, so it was nothing for... I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird. But let's continue here. Views of correspondence. Great pressure of work and lack of time have prevented earlier examinations and translation of all the South American UFO material of recent years. When earlier this year I had run through a lot of 1969 clippings, I at once wrote off to Brazil to ask several of the correspondents for their views. Did they, I asked, knowledgeable people about Brazil and about the Brazilian UFO scene, really feel satisfied that this was the truth at last about the Morro do Ventêm? Their replies are negative. One of them made a particularly interesting comment, which I quote, "As for the lead masks case, we are all pretty certain that the explanation put out by the authorities in February 1969 was faked. It was at the precise time that the big drive against all UFO investigators in Brazil began in earnest. The authorities were doing everything they could to debunk the flying saucers. It would therefore have been very unwise indeed for any of us to look any further into the Morro do Ventêm case just then. Ufologists in Brazil were even being linked with the activities of the terrorists, and consequently we were almost careful not to attract attention to ourselves. As you say, the official explanation does smell to high heaven. FSR might, of course, publish the whole story again with full details, adding the official explanation as a footnote and ending with the words, case closed. This might give your readers a chuckle or two." So, there it remains. Brazil, like every other country for that matter, certainly does have its seamy side, and just as has happened elsewhere, it is very easy for criminal elements to make use of psychic seances and spiritualistic activities as a cloak for something else. In addition to this, we must not overlook the evidence already strong from many other quarters that the paraphysical or ultra-terrestrial entities could be behind the so-called UFO phenomenon and are not over-addicted to the practices of morality and virtue themselves, but are indeed using terrestrial criminal elements to do their work for them. Wow! That's a crazy theory. So there was some communication. So if there was some communication with interdimensional ultra-terrestrial beings of some kind, or actual beings from Mars, whatever the case may be, did these beings also manipulate some of the spiritualists against the others? Wow. That would be kind of crazy. Dino Craspedon. It is most unfortunate that genuine paraphysical research and inquiry and genuine psychic work, so much of which is devoted to healing, should suffer a backlash from all of this. But if we bear in mind the business about Aladino Felix, wow, what a name, also known as Dino Craspedon, another great name. The guy's name is Aladino, like Aladdin, Aladino Felix, who, so we understand, turned out to be a terrorist who was going to bring in the Venusians to help him. Then it is not one whit surprising if in the past 2 or 3 years we should have seen the Brazilian authorities stamp very heavily on all psychic and spiritualistic activities, including spiritual healing, as well as on everything relating to UFO research. So wait a second, some of these spiritualists, are they trying to enlist the help of Venusians or Martians to go against the Brazilian government? Is this what this is all really about? And the government wants to shut that down. At first glance, I suppose the story allegedly told by Hamilton Bizani might seem reasonable and likely enough, but is it? The 2 victims had left their homes in Campos by bus for Niterói at 9 a.m. on Wednesday, August 17th, saying that they were going to Sao Paulo to buy a car and electronic equipment. Their bus reached Niterói at about 2 p.m. the same day, and at 5 p.m., after they had bought the raincoats as it was raining and had bought mineral water in a bar, they were allegedly seen by a boy sitting at a point high atop the Morro do Ventêm. The same boy detected their putrefying bodies on August 20th when he was bird nesting on the hillside. And in the other account we read, he actually saw them 3 times. He saw them once when he thought they were sleeping. So that was the 3rd time when he actually thought they were dead. What I personally find sticking in my craw is the idea, which we are apparently expected to buy, that the criminals already had their plans worked out to the extent of having prepared the lead masks and the notes, which we are to presume were already in their pockets when they met their victims at the seance center. It is true that there remain serious discrepancies in all reports that I have seen. For example, in 1966, the press said that the 2 men had left their homes in Campos on August 17th. But I note that in 1969, some of the press reports were saying that they had set out on August 15th. In the latter case, they would obviously have been in Niterói and perhaps hanging around and visiting the Morro and even the Spiritistic Center too for several days, long enough, admittedly, for the murderers to learn all about them and prepare the lead masks and so on. But weren't the materials for the lead masks found in their home, unless they were planted or that was just made up by the police and the police just said they found the materials there, even if they didn't. At any rate, regardless of my own feelings, it is to be noted that our trusted observers in Brazil say that they too view the explanation with much reserve. If Hamilton Bazzani and his trio of friends with the fabulous Damon Runyon-esque names really do exist, and if Bazzani really was, as we are told, in 1969 serving a gaol sentence of 50 years in Sao Paulo, then the thought occurs to my suspicious mind that such a man as Hamilton Bazzani would be a heaven-sent gift to any government desirous of making troublesome ghosts lie down and stay down. What hardened old lag doing a 50-year stretch would be averse to earning a little remission, indeed, why not full liberty, by making any nice little confession so long as it pleased the authorities? After all, the reports do not represent Hamilton as being one of the actual murderers, but only an accomplice. From my own experience of matters relating to the way in which police sometimes operate in Brazil, and I had some very interesting experience which, alas, cannot be related here, I have more than a sneaking suspicion that this fine old lag, Signor Hamilton Bazzani, if he exists at all outside of the columns of the newspapers and the police statements, is at full liberty out and about, perhaps enjoying himself on the beach at Copacabana with his other spiv pals, while officialdom heaves sighs of release and fervently hopes that it will never be necessary anymore to think about the mystery of the dead men with leaden masks on the Morro do Vintem. As for the enigmatic blonde man, it will be observed that he seems to have got lost somewhere along the way, together with the pilot Elcio Gomez. Or, being a blonde, was he in fact Wilson Alamau? One must admit, of course, that Wilson does not sound a convincingly Teutonic name. In conclusion, let us say of this whole affair as an Italian might, so non è vero e molto ben trovato. At the beginning of August 1968, Aladino Felix, alias Sabato Dinotos, alias Dino Craspedon, appeared on television in Sao Paulo and stated publicly that his book, Meu Contacto com os Discos Voadores, My Contact with Flying Saucers, was nothing more than sheer invention. At the end of August, he was arrested together with a number of other people charged with being the leader of a terrorist group in Brazil. It now seems pretty certain that he was deeply involved in terroristic activities, but was by no means the leader of the group. The press had been full of his testimony, and indeed on September 10th, the Sao Paulo paper Ultima Hora devoted the whole of 3 pages to it with headlines 5 inches high. He had been singing like the proverbial canary, but what he has said is so fantastic and so contradictory that there can be no doubt that the poor chap is extremely unbalanced. He has even gone so far as to say that his arrest will have serious consequences for humanity, as the Venusians will soon attack Earth in order to free him and his friends. In connection with this highly interesting and significant report from Mr. Rhymes, I feel, however, that it would also be wise to bear in mind the suggestion made by John Keel in his Operation Trojan Horse, pages 280 to 281, that Dino Craspedon was not simply a hoaxer who had invented a UFO story, but a man who had most probably had some kind of genuine experience with ultra-terrestrial UFO entities, who had taken control of him, caused him to develop psychic powers so that he could even appear on the Brazilian television and predict the forthcoming assassinations of Senator Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and who finally led him into courses of action that were calculated to spell total disaster for him. Wow. So, in other words, the others were the hoaxers, not their tool, Dino Kraspedon. Such considerations as these must likewise never be absent from our minds when we do contemplate such cases as the mystery of the Morro do Vintém. Among the charming Brazilian people, one encounters many delightful, colorful, even pompous or highfalutin nicknames and names and nicknames like these, and I made a collection of them. I knew a state governor whose name was Sylvester Pericles, and the huge and immensely genial Negro taxi driver whose cab was usually parked in front of my consulate was called Napoleon. And may I add here, for the edification of readers and perhaps also for posterity, that I shall never forget that splendid evening which I spent in a bar in Miami in 1942 drinking Cuba Libres with the gentleman who was the original on whom Damon Runyon had modeled his immortal character, Harry the Horse. Harry the Horse was wearing the uniform of the U.S. Army and was in training at one of the great military camps in the Deep South before going to a theater of war overseas. I have often wondered whether he came through it all. Or, as we might put it colloquially, if it isn't true, well, at least it sounds good. Okay, wow, what a mind-shocking follow-up there. Now, with this ultra-terrestrial angle where they take control of humans, that is also something we have not mentioned before. So were some or all of these individuals in the spiritualist center, if they're opening them up to communications, if they're opening these channels to communicating with entities from Mars or other interdimensional entities pretending to be entities from Mars, does that also open them up to possession of sorts? Did these people unwittingly stumble in the middle of some kind of intergalactic or interdimensional war between Martians and Venusians or whatever groups of ultra-terrestrial or interdimensional entities, if they're warring with each other, and now they're taking possessions of humans to fight each other and blow up each other's UFOs? Is that a possibility? Is that the most mind-shocking theory yet in this case? I mean, that's the ultra mind-shock McGuire theory. Because that possibly could account for a lot of this stuff as well. I mean, other areas also report something curious about the grass at the site where the bodies were found. Apparently, for years, nothing grew there. Some people believe it's because of whatever. So apparently, investigators sprinkled formalin around the area to mask the smell of decomposition, and supposedly that is what contaminated the soil. And that's why nothing grew there for a long time. But who knows? There's also a time travel theory. This is another one. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of rabbit holes we haven't gone down. So on Who Forted blog, F-O-R-T-E-D, it's no longer up, but back in April 10th, 2011, there's an article here by Jason Corbis, Mysteries, Vintage Fringe, What Happened on Vintam Hill, The Mystery of the Lead Masks. He proposes this theory. Another contention is that the victims were wannabe time travelers and that they believed they discovered a wormhole of sorts through which to travel. Could the impermeable coats and lead masks have been protective gear meant to shield their bodies somehow? If so, was it necessary to ingest the capsules? Okay, so if they are actual time travelers, possibly trying to connect with these Venusians or Martians, I mean, are these UFOs interdimensional vortices or some kind of time travel interdimensional vortices that they themselves are opening up? And just vast amounts of energy, and it's so bright, that's why they need the lead masks? That still wouldn't necessarily explain the several years prior, the other guy that died with the lead mask. I mean, there's just something weird going on here. There's a missing variable here that we obviously don't have. On Unresolved Mysteries, Vesuvius 1 actually had an interesting post here. It always seemed obvious to me what happened. The dead men fell victim to a fatal ruse. They had encountered a con man who promised to sell radioactive material to them. Why they'd want to buy such a thing is anyone's guess, but they fell for it and agreed to the deal. The con man gave them a location for the handoff, asked them to bring cash, and then gave them some poison pills that he claimed was anti-radiation medicine so that the men could inspect the merchandise safely. The men made the lead masks for extra safety, or the con man gave it to them. They show up, take the pills, drop dead. The con man made off with their cash. Wow, that's actually a really good theory. Of course, it still doesn't account for all the UFO activity, the explosion on the beach, or this clandestine radio station, which these investigators apparently disappeared for however long investigating and then possibly came back promised an arrest that never came, or did it come and it was all kept hush hush? Who knows? I want to know more about this clandestine radio station and this third man who's an airline pilot, and he's also involved in this clandestine radio station. Like, what is this radio station? I need to, like, this seems to be like one of the major factors, and then also their activity making these devices. Is it possible that they did need some kind of radioactive material? They could only obtain it on the black market or illegally. So there's some kind of terroristic overlap, possibly. Maybe they want it for scientific purposes, either for interdimensional travel, communication, or time travel, whatever. I mean, I don't know, man. This is just one of the most mind-shocking cases ever, no doubt. One more post also on Unresolved Mysteries is from Seif. I'm Brazilian and have done research on this subject, which I find particularly interesting, but we have built a rather simple theory on it. There is some important background on it, and one particular and unexplainable factor is that apparently there was some radiation around their bodies, and the grass didn't grow back regularly where they were found. The bodies were found by a kid who was flying a kite nearby. Some of the cash on them was missing, leading to my theory, but it might have been the kid, especially considering it was nearby the slums or the favela. There are some reports that both of them were UFO enthusiasts and attended UFO meetings sometime before this event. The police arrested an acquaintance, a spiritualist, who had introduced them to grandiose experiences, including one which resulted in a huge explosion that was mistaken by people as an earthquake, and others reported a huge flash of light. He was released due to lack of evidence. Witnesses reported they carried the equivalent of around $2,000 with them, but it was never found. It is important to notice that between the discovery of the bodies and the time the police filed the report, there is a period of 2 days, leading to believe that the cash could have been stolen in between, so after they died, by other people possibly not involved in the deaths. Witnesses also reported that they arrived to the place in a Jeep with 2 unidentified men. The raincoats can be easily explained because in this day there really was a thunderstorm going on. Some witnesses reported seeing UFOs around the time of the death. My theory is that someone in these UFO meetings just felt like they were easy prey, gave them the pills, and instructed on how to see a UFO they wanted so much. Told them to get the lead masks, go to this isolated place, and wait until it happens. The pills were lethal, and the guy just proceeded to take the money and leave. Possibly even the aforementioned spiritualist or another acquaintance. There was a Brazilian website with much more information on the case. Although it was made by UFO enthusiasts and was heavily biased towards this, it has since been deactivated. This website gives much more detailed information, including the names of the witnesses and the amount of cash found on the bodies, $68 on one and $2 on the other. So the $2,000 apparently was missing. Very curious. Another commenter here, ShadowJack00, posted this. My personal take is that it was a con job gone wrong that winded up in a double murder. Possible scenario, a la Richard Castle. Imagine a couple of young men who had some electrical knowledge but were frustrated in some dead-end careers. A con man gets to know about them and decides to scam them out of some money. He gets to know them, tells them he knows this inventor who has an incredible invention but needs some guys with electrical training to get it to the market. Oh, and by the way, it's a great chance to get in the ground floor as investors. They are told to get some money and protective gear so they can see the invention in operation. They show up at the site and take their radiation absorption capsules as instructed with water. They put the raincoats on so they can be decontaminated after, over their suits so they can get right to the meeting after. The only problem is that the pills they are given by the con man are way too powerful. That's what happens when you buy drugs on the street, and they overdose. The con man panics, not sure if the money was found in the bodies, and bolts, maybe with the money, but he keeps his mouth shut from that point on. That's very interesting as well. It still doesn't explain the UFOs, the clandestine radio stations, all this other stuff, but that's an interesting, simple theory. So, someone also posted a Google document translated from, whatever other languages that has a little bit of more detail here. So Rolino de Matos is apparently the witness who worked near the area who said he saw Manuel and Miguel board a Jeep with 2 other men. According to this witness, the 4 exchanged words and then followed the vehicle to climb the hill. The group, however, would have followed on foot since at the time there was a road. Translation here is not great. And just there's also some speculation on whether the boy or one of the guards or police, whoever he got, might have actually taken some money from the bodies. There was also a watch and a gold chain in the pockets. So that's interesting. So they did not pilfer those. Very curious. It also says a few interesting things about Elcio Gomez. It gives his middle name, Carrera. And according to the wife of Michael Elcio, according to the wife of it's a bad translation. Elcio was a strong influence, and the three had secrets of living. He would have brought the two friends studying the occult and introduced them into paranormal experience. So, supposedly, one of the wives is blaming Elcio for introducing them to the spiritualism, but there's also rumors that Elcio was only appearing as a spiritualist and he was actually involved in witchcraft. It also mentions that Vele did find some traces of radiation in the soil. Also, a few other notes. In the Forensic Institute of Niterói, it states that a lot of victims rotted before being examined because they were broken refrigerators, so they couldn't refrigerate bodies properly. So apparently there was also a Hotline Globo program on this. During the program, they asked for a reopening of the case and an analysis of the documents. But mysteriously, the box that contained the entire process was empty. All the documents disappeared. Okay, I mean, that's another curiosity, is it not? Huh. That's kind of weird. So apparently, as of the 80s or early 90s, whenever this was done for this program, all of the documents are now missing or can't be found on this case. That definitely leads one to slant to some possible government cover-up related to UFOs, because if it was really just some kind of fraud thing at the Spiritualist Center, why would all the documents be gone? One final theory here from Unresolved Mysteries, again, by That Description 593, posted this. So I have listened to a podcast episode about this, and I have done some research myself. This is my theory. If someone finds some reason that this doesn't match with certain info about the case, please reply to this comment. It was an illegal exchange of something radioactive for their machine. They may have built a machine a few months prior to their death, and it was supposed to be able to contact aliens, and it didn't work. So they wanted to get some other materials, maybe some that are illegal or just harder to work with, so they can try building another machine, one that possibly could work. And this piece they had to get was highly radioactive, so they were given some tablets they can take. Those tablets would contain small fractions of some drug that can maybe protect them from radioactiveness, but is also fatal for their health. So they were instructed to take the tablet every so often, so that in the end they could take a capsule with the full amount of the drug. So now that drug will protect them, but also won't cause as much harm to them because they already took small amounts of it before. So basically, they were told all of this from a person that was going to give them the illegal radioactive piece, and that person had already given them the lead mask and also to keep them safe. Hence, they made a schedule with everything they had to do, how frequently they should take the pills, the meeting time on the hill, etc. They also brought money with them. Since this was highly illegal, they made up alibis to make sure they don't get arrested. When they were on the meeting place, they took the final capsule with the needed amount of drug to keep them safe from the radioactivity, and they accidentally or intentionally overdosed on the drug. Maybe the person that was going to do the exchange with them scammed them and ran away with the money, or maybe the person accidentally gave them the wrong instructions or something like that and ended up killing them. Not wanting to be caught, they stole the money, ran away, and never since opened their mouths about what happened. I hope everything I just said makes sense. Also, sorry for any grammatical errors. Okay, so that's an interesting theory, but again, it doesn't explain, why would the police... It doesn't explain the clandestine radio station. It doesn't explain why they sort of reopened the case a year later and then made up this other criminal who's confessing to bringing... I mean, maybe that guy really was involved in this with some kind of exchange, but none of this really makes any sense. This is definitely one of the most mind-shocking cases I have ever looked at. What does everybody think about all this? I mean, this is just pure mind-shocking insanity. I have, of course, the regular McGuire theory and the more mind-shocking McGuire theory. That's all I got for now. Just truly a mind-shocking one. All the mind-shock listeners out there, feel free to jump in with your thoughts, theories, comments, debunkings, or rebuttals of any kind in the comments section. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can also become a member on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. And like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.